Hey guys, in today's video we're going to do part 1 of the Gladiator Realism analysis. Before we begin with that though, I have a few things I need to talk about. For starters, I heard a few of you want the audio to be a bit louder, so from now on I can make the videos as loud as this. I can't raise it any higher though without it getting distorted. As for previous videos though, I can't edit the audio within YouTube Studio, and I'm not going to re-upload them either because I still think that they're audible enough. So unfortunately there's nothing I can really do with that. Next topic of discussion is that I'm going to be doing a double upload today. My other video is talking about the Valandian faction and Mountain Blade Bannerlord. So if you're a fan of Bannerlord or just want to learn more about it, go ahead and check that video out as well. One last thing before we get back to the video and talk about the poll results is the polls themselves. Out of the blue, I received an email from YouTube saying that they'll be suspending support in the in-video polls in the cards. They say that it's not being used enough to warrant keeping it, but if it's not being used, I feel like it'd be more effort to remove it. So unfortunately, we will no longer be doing polls within the videos as it's no longer within my control. The options they do give us in lieu of the removal of the card polls is either to do a Google form, which is just ridiculously excessive and unnecessary for our case in my opinion, or to do a poll from the community post tab. I really didn't want to have to send you guys to another link just to vote in a poll that would only take a few seconds, but my hands are tied here. This means that the next poll we will do, you're going to have to make sure you keep an eye on the YouTube community tabs to look out for my post to vote in it, but I'll also try to link to it in the final part when we get around to it as well. Now, back to the original topic at hand. I'm going to be honest with you guys, y'all really surprised me with the poll results from the last video. It was much closer than the poll we had before that, but Gladiator was still the obvious winner. For a bit of time, Highlander was neck and neck with Glad, but lost the lead soon after. What I originally thought was going to happen was that Peacekeeper was going to win, but she was surprisingly third the entire time. I was also kind of hoping that Highlander would win because I've been wanting to talk about Big Sword, but out of all the choices I had to go through in my head, I didn't actually see Gladiator coming out on top, so congratulations on fooling me with that. Now, when it comes to this video, bear with me as I'm sure I've stated before that classical and ancient history really isn't within my wheelhouse. Pair that with the fact that this hero is such a jumble of information that it might get difficult to keep track of what is what. On some level, I actually dreaded doing a video on this hero because there's just so much context that needs to be laid out and not enough time. So this video might actually be shorter than usual because of that. It was either keep the weapons and armor split up or put them together and make a much longer video. So without further ado, let's just start with some basic information about what a gladiator is. So we all pretty much know that gladiators were warriors of sport for the most part. They fought for entertainment of others, whether that be willingly or in most earlier cases unwillingly. What most people don't realize is that these fighters were put into specific classes that would be pitted against other specific classes. For example, the Retriarios class would fight the Secutor class in particular. If you want information on all the gladiator classes that were used in Rome, then I'd suggest watching a video done by the Metatron that briefly talks about each one. I'll leave a link to that in the description down below. In this video, I only want to cover what this gladiator we have in-game takes inspiration from and what we can correlate with that. For starters, let's take an overall look at what common elements every variation of our gladiator has. Glad will always have a form of helmet, some form of manica arm protection, a very large and ornate belt, a trident, and a buckler. Now since this video is only going to be focusing on the weapons, we're only going to talk about the trident and buckler for now. So starting with the weapons, you may have heard me say buckler, and yes, I mean buckler. When talking about buckler specifically, they're meant to be more of a medieval to Renaissance piece of equipment. To my knowledge, not something we would see on a Roman gladiator. Now on the game's wiki, which so many people love to quote to me book, chapter, and verse, it says in-game our gladiator is a combination of Retriarius due to the trident, which I'll get back to, and a Hoplomachus due to the use of a small shield. Now I don't want to say that this is entirely wrong, but I do have some discrepancies with it. But before that, in their defense, 1, there is no gladiator that uses a buckler, so we're working with what we've got here. 2, in the one Metatron video, yes, the one I recommended to you, there is an image of a Hoplomachus using what looks like a metal center grip shield like that of a buckler. I'm curious to see where the Metatron got those images from because they seem very high quality like those out of a textbook. I don't know how correct that depiction of a Hoplomachus' shield would look like for a few reasons, but regardless I still think the information in that video is still valuable and the visual representations are really good for the majority of it. The reason I don't think a Hoplomachus is a good example of our gladiator here is due to what a Hoplomachus is in nature. It's supposed to be a representation of what a Greek hoplite is, not a one-to-one example, as the shield is supposed to be smaller than that of a hoplon or a Greek hoplite's shield, but still not as small as the buckler we have in game. But even if it were as small, a hoplon shield still has a big difference to a buckler. A buckler is meant to be center gripped only, while a hoplon is supposed to be strapped to the arm. Even if they were the same exact size and made out of the same material, the attachment system of the shield to the user would make how effective that shield is and how it's used vary greatly. Now, even though the artistic depiction we have of a hoplon from the Metatron's video shows that the Hoplomachus is using a center grip shield, if we begin to look at actual historical depictions of a Hoplomachus on a Roman glass found at the Begram treasure, we can see that the shield terminates at around the elbow area. That means that the center of the shield would need to be somewhere in the forearm area, or at least where the wrist is. Definitely not by the knuckles like a center grip shield would be. So it appears that the Hoplomachus uses a strap shield like those of the Greek hoplites. Who would have guessed? But if the Hoplomachus uses a strap shield, were there any gladiators that used a center grip shield besides the very large and rectangular scutums? Well, technically the answer is yes, introducing the Parmularios gladiator. This gladiator's name comes from the use of the parma, a Roman center grip round or oval shield that is much smaller than that of a scutum. Is this pretty much a buckler? No, but it is center gripped, and when we have to get to animations and fighting styles for the gladiator, I'll show you how much more advantageous this is. With all that said, we're still not done talking about shields. This is why I kinda dreaded doing this character, but if I don't do it, then who will? Now we have to talk about the types of in-game models for all those types of bucklers we have. For the sake of brevity and so I can rapid fire as much of these as possible, I'm going to very briefly go over some of the important ones and try to cut out all the unnecessary details. To start, every single one of these is made out of planked wood, even the ones that look like they have metal on the front. This is just one of the quirks Ubisoft has when making shields, and it's kind of forgivable when it comes to the larger shields, but for a shield this small, you don't need to be using planks of wood. In fact, you don't even need to be using wood at all. Medieval bucklers are notoriously all metal, so if this game is going to call it a buckler, then I'm going to have to judge it as one. Now if we just pretend that there is no wood behind some of these bucklers and they were all metal, then some of them do pretty good. Just to name a few, the Juno, Minerva, Wicked, and Brash buckler do look like they could be plausible bucklers. I may have left out a few, but these are just some of the ones that I thought were noteworthy. Now, just quickly, there's two that I just want to shit on because I think it's hilarious, is the Sea Urchin and the crowd favorite. Both of these have a shield boss, but neither of them represent the actual size of the dish space on the inside of the shield. It's like the frickin' TARDIS from Doctor Who. They're smaller on the outside, but on the inside there's magically more space. And look, I know artists aren't armorers or anything, but this is like the whole reason a shield boss is there. You would think that the artist would be given a live prop to hold on to draw a basis off of and realize, hey, that bulge is the same size of the space I can put my fist in.
Wait a minute!
Okay, I feel like we've talked enough about bucklers, so let's move on to the Trident. Now, originally the Trident is a fishing tool, and you may have heard me talk earlier about the Retriarius. Well, the Retriarius was the only class of gladiator that could actually wield the Trident as a weapon. The Retriarius is a very literal translation, means netman, or in a more understandable sense, means fisherman. They were known for wielding a trident and a net, and I will talk about the nets when we get to feats, but I don't think we'll do that in this video, so let's just focus on the trident for now. When talking about the trident as a weapon, this is really the only case that I know of the trident being used as a weapon. No, wait. Apparently there's something called a deng pa in Korean martial arts that looks like a trident. Well, in my opinion, that's much longer than a trident, and overall, I think coincidental. Back to the westernized trident that we were talking about. This was overall meant to be a fishing tool. Why was that? Well, for starters, the multiple prongs when spearfishing help catch a fish and get control of it so that you can bring it out of water. It also gives you a higher chance of spearing the fish if you happen to miss a little bit. You may be thinking that these might be helpful perks to have in combat as well. Let me explain why that's not really the case. For starters, one of the biggest problems you'll have with multiple prongs is the dissipation of force. All of your forward momentum placed into one point of contact will always be stronger than dividing your forward momentum into 3 points of contact. Now, they actually remedy this problem by making the middle prong long enough to ensure that it will make contact before the side prongs do. Another problem you might run into with a trident is since it's meant to stab and control fish, it might have a chance to get caught in your target. In a fight, that's not really a good thing to have. Last but not least, a spear will always be cheaper to make. A trident isn't really a concealable everyday carry weapon for a civilian, so its only chance to come up in prominence would be in military use, or used in an arena for entertainment obviously. But if you're a military, the pros of using a spear far outweigh the pros of using a trident. And don't get me wrong, there are pros to using a trident, mind you, but I'll get to those when I get to the animations and fighting style video, as I can't really explain it here without demonstration. Now, when talking about the trident heads, I don't think you need me to tell you what tridents are usable and which ones aren't. I have in good faith that you can figure that out on your own. Instead, I'm just going to talk about a few general details from a couple of the in-game models that we have. For starters, when we look at the very few artistic depictions we have of the Retriarius using a trident, we can see that in most cases the head of the trident is very small. Also in those cases, it's hard to make out whether or not these are barbs on the points of the trident. The barbs would usually help fishermen not have their catch squirm off of the trident when stabbed, but I'm assuming if you were a fighter, you would probably want your weapon back rather than leaving it stuck in your opponent. In the game, we don't see the very small head that we would see in the depictions, but we do have various types of trident head styles. We have the Minerva head, which has that kind of cliche rounded look to it. We have the Brash Victoria, Crowd Favorite, and Arena Veteran heads, which all have that generalized idea of what a fighting trident might look like. We even have those like the Prize Fighter, Sea Urchin, and by association, the Mars Nauden heads that have that very fisherman style of trident head. Overall, a large majority of these trident heads do very well at showing the many variations these could come in. Whether they made specific tridents for gladiatorial combat, or if they just literally gave them straight up fisherman's tools, I actually don't know. I know that later gladiators, especially those who choose to enter the arenas willingly, were allowed to purchase gear and bring in their own equipment. So I'm sure that maybe at one point a Retriarius had a custom fighting trident that was made for the arena. I'm sure there's some of you that know more about Rome and specifically gladiatorial combat, so if you have more information you'd like to share on this, let me know, I'd love to hear it. Now, when moving on to the shaft, we encounter the same instance that usually comes up with most weapons that have a shaft. If you watch my Lawbringer weapon analysis, then you'll remember when I talked about the shaft needing to just basically be a wooden rod that can be easily replaced. So if we wanted to choose the one in-game that represents that the best, I would say that hands down the Sea Urchin shaft takes the place. There are a few other wooden shafts, but this one is directly all wood and then is wrapped in leather towards the center for extra grip. That being said, there are a few things that I want to talk about when it comes to the general design of some of these shafts. If we were to throw aside materials and ergonomics, I like the idea of some of these weapons. For starters, both the Hades and Neptune shaft have some form of a mini trident head at the bottom. I think this is really interesting because it gives you the option to reverse the weapon and use basically a backup trident should the need arise. We also know that the butt of the shaft is used while looking at some finishers, and I believe some other animations as well. Another set of shafts that I find interesting is the Boastful shaft, Victoria shaft, and most importantly the Juno shaft. All of these have some form of weight or what looks like a mace head to them. I think that this is genuinely a good idea considering that 1. It provides counterbalance to a very top heavy weapon. 2. It'll give you a blunt side option, effectively giving you a mace on a very long stick to take care of armored opponents. 3. It looks really cool. The Juno shaft particularly has a very jagged shape to it that would probably work well as a flanged mace head. Last one I want to talk about is the Brutal shaft, as this one is the most interesting because it gives you the best of both worlds. Sorta. It gives you a bulbous mace head pommel thing that you can use as a blunt attack, but you also get a rear spike to stab with as well if you need to. As an overall surface level concept, I think this one's pretty interesting as well. Since this video is much shorter than I realized, we actually are going to quickly go over feats since there isn't actually much to talk about. To start, we have the feat known as Neptune's Wrath. This one is interesting because all you do is throw your trident at the enemy. Now, in game, you don't lose your trident, but you kind of just summon a trident to throw at the enemy and then go back to normal. But realistically, we can assume that this is meant to imitate throwing your only trident you have, as we can see there's no backup trident that you carry. In an actual gladiatorial sense, it could be possible that a Retriarius would want to throw his only trident at an opponent, but it would have to be when the opponent was not expecting it or when the opponent was incapacitated. Obviously, due to the fact that if he were to miss or lose his trident somehow, the only thing he would have left to defend himself with would be the Pugio, or what is basically a dagger. Speaking of incapacitating an opponent, we have the next feat called the Boleadoras, or also known as the bolas for short. Now, as far as I could tell, these items were mostly used by South Americans and then later expanded into the majority of Americas, but never really being used anywhere else, especially in Rome about 1,000 years prior. They might have been used, but I haven't seen anything corroborating that. Even if we put all that aside though, Ubisoft is missing a big opportunity here. If only there were a type of gladiator class that wielded a trident and used some sort of capture device to entrap their opponents. And then they could even be known for their trap, like if it were a net. They could be called Netman or something. If only. Joking aside, they know what a Retiarius is because they literally have an armor set called the Retiarius set. More on that later. Yet they don't use the net as a throwable weapon instead of the bolas. Effectively, they could both work the same way and only have an aesthetic change, so I don't know why they did this instead of doubling down on the Retiarius theme. One final feat that I do want to talk about would be the Roar of the Crowd feat. Not because I really have anything important to say about it, but mostly because I remember talking to a few of you guys about how Gladiator is basically this crazed performer that doesn't realize he's on a battlefield, so he's just running around thinking it's just one big show. I like to think that this supports that theory because when you activate Roar of the Crowd, there's no actual crowd that cheers you on, yet the Gladiator basically gets a second wind that increases his damage. I'd like to think that the crowd isn't real and it's all in his head, but his teammates don't want to tell him otherwise because he's been really helpful. Alright, because talking about armor would tack on another 30 minutes onto this video, and there aren't any emotes that are worth talking about, and finishers I feel would fit better in the animations video, we're going to cut the video off here. If you guys enjoyed this video, leaving a like would be much appreciated. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, or things that you'd like to see or have talked about in the next episode, go ahead and let me know down below. Don't forget to check out my new Bannerlord video if you wanted to go watch that. Thank you for watching this, and I hope you have a great day. Peace.